Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Before we dive into this week's content, I have a quick announcement. If you haven't already heard, my daughter and I have released another podcast, also on YouTube, called the Take Two Podcast. We're releasing videos every Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock Mountain Time, in which we dig into biblical topics that are controversial, and it's a lot of fun. She's 15 and so we're having conversations that are appropriate for teenagers on biblical topics. So far, we've released videos on creation, what does it mean to be human, how should we think about evil and suffering, and how can we read biblical prophecy. So I hope you check out those videos on our YouTube page and share those with your friends. Now for this week's topic, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've released 2 videos already for Torah Tuesday on Genesis chapter 3. I was ready to move on, but some of you have asked some really good questions and made some observations on YouTube in the comments, and I realized that I actually missed some things in Genesis 3 that are important to say. In fact, I said something wrong in a previous video. So this week is a little bit of a deeper dive and a correction to something that I said previously. In a previous video, I talked about the nakedness of the first man and woman and how there's a play on words between their nakedness and the craftiness of the serpent. So we're told at the end of chapter 2 that they are naked, arumim, and then we're told that in the very next verse, chapter 3, verse 1, that the snake is arum, and so it sounds arumim and arum sound a lot alike. And in fact, they're almost identical in their root form, arom and arum. And then we learned later that after the man and the woman eat from the tree, their eyes are opened, and instead of becoming wise about other things, they become wise about themselves and they realize their nakedness. What I hadn't noticed is that that word for naked is not quite the same as the word for naked that we get in chapter 2, verse 25. So in Genesis 3:7, they are erumim rather than arumim. There's just a slight difference in consonants, slight difference in vowels. There doesn't seem to be a dramatic difference in meaning, but probably what we're seeing here is that their innocent nakedness from chapter 2 has become a shameful and self-conscious nakedness after they eat of the fruit of the forbidden tree. So I pointed out in that previous video that arur is the word for curse, which sounds a lot like arom for naked and arum for crafty. So arum, arom, arur, there's a lot of similar sounding words here that bind this story and make it a beautiful literary whole. But what I hadn't noticed is that God does not curse the man and the woman. He only curses the snake and the ground. Now, he does express punishment for the man and the woman, and that punishment is severe, but it's not called a curse, and this is probably significant. So it's not entirely clear, as I was digging into this, it's not entirely clear whether God is prescribing how things will be for the man and the woman, or whether he's describing how they will be. Either way, he's allowing them to experience the natural consequences of their rebellion, their decision not to trust him and obey his word. So there is punishment, but it's either punishment by allowing this to happen or punishment by causing it to happen, and either is possible. I think this is significant because if God is cursing humans, then their fate is inescapable. But if he's allowing them to experience the natural consequences of their sin, then they are not relegated to this state forever. There's actually room for them to experience consequences and then grow beyond those consequences. So there's a definite note of hope here that I missed before. Thank you for pointing that out to me. While I was investigating these questions, I came across a profound reflection by Walter Brueggemann that I want to share with you. It's in his commentary on Genesis in the Interpretation series, and I thought it was really worth sharing. I'm going to read for a little bit here. So this is starting on page 47. He's talking about the dialogue between the snake and the woman and how it's talking about God rather than talking to God and how dangerous that can be. He says theological talk, which seeks to analyze and objectify matters of faithfulness, is a dangerous enterprise. The prohibition, which seemed a given, is now scrutinized as though it were not a given but an option. He's, of course, talking about the prohibition against eating from the tree. Theological ethical talk here is not to serve, but to avoid the claims of God. God is treated as a third person. God is not a party to the discussion, but is the involved object of the discussion. This is not speech to God or with God, but about God. God has been objectified. The serpent is the first in the Bible to seem knowing and critical about God and to practice theology in the place of obedience. The matter of death had been mentioned in 2:17 by God, but had not been the main point. It was not a threat, but a candid acknowledgement of a boundary to life. But the boundary is now altered to become a threat. It is transformed into a terror which puts everything in question. It is not God, but the serpent who has made death a primary human agenda. This subtle theological talk is a distortion of the realities. The serpent says back God's speech in just enough of a twist to miss the point. The serpent grossly misrepresents God in chapter 3, verse 1, and is corrected by the woman in verses 2 and 3. But by then, the misquotation has opened up to consciousness the possibility of an alternative to the way of God. From that point on, things become distorted. The rhetoric of fidelity or faithfulness has given way to analysis and calculation. The givenness of God's rule is no longer the boundary of a safe place. God is now a barrier to be circumvented. We are always in danger of thinking that we know better than God. And so my encouragement to you and to me as we proceed with this study of Scripture is this. May our eagerness to understand Scripture never become the means by which we avoid the more important tasks of faithful obedience and trust. Have a great week.